Todd Lewis.
No.
No, who's Todd Lewis?
Well, he messaged me after my debate with Doug Wilson. Oh, looks like we're live. I was gonna ask you if I could plug a debate that he's doing, but I guess
Go for it.
here I am plugging a debate that Todd Lewis is doing with, who is it? Todd Lewis versus Zach Lesher on the Gospel Truth Debate Show on YouTube. On the subject is, does the New Testament teach pacifism? And I will put a link of that in the comments right now. It's in about 4 days from now, but if anyone's interested, I will put a link and you can go check it out. Support the bro. We're taking down the Just War guys one at a time.
Yeah, I've been waiting a long time for that. Well, let's give an introduction here. Welcome everybody. We have Titus Kipfer in Virginia, podcaster extraordinaire. Then in the next box is me, Matthew Milioni in Boston. Then we have Blanky Dave Eicher. Is it Eicher or Eicher?
Eicher, hard
All
K.
right,
Eicher.
you're not a Mennonite, are you?
Nope.
No, he's not.
And then you're in Ohio, yeah, Dave?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we have Anthony Hertzler in Oklahoma, in the bottom corner there. So here's how it's going to work. We're just going to ramble like we always do. And if anybody wants to drop a comment in the feed, we got Dave monitoring for it, and he can pick up any questions that are really, really good and throw them in. But our Facebook feed is about 5 seconds delayed behind our actual meeting, so we'll circle back around to it. So where are we going to start? Do you want to kick things off, Titus?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, we were planning to talk about missiology and church planting and all of that, but last couple of days as things have been ramping up, I mean, there's kind of one general elephant in the room, and that's this virus. And it blew my mind how quickly this became tribalistic and polarized neatly along party lines. Like it it was like it takes America like a week to all split evenly on two sides of an issue and yell at each other. It doesn't matter what the issue is. It seems somewhat arbitrary that conservatives have decided to be the ones, saying this is not something to worry about. Except, I mean, I do have a theory on that. I mean, I think it's partially just because, the media is the one telling us about this, and conservatives are, aligned against the media, and therefore they're going to be skeptical. Also, Trump at first was skeptical about it, and so obviously they're going to follow suit. But now it's pretty crazy how quickly Trump has shifted his narrative, which I think is shifting the overall narrative as well. But it was really shocking to me how quickly it became political.
Well, maybe we could start at a bigger place, because as we talked about what we want to talk about, it occurred to me that there's a constellation of issues that I feel like, let's just speak to the church. Like, I don't have, it's not my job to fix America, but let's talk about the church. I feel like there's a constellation of issues that we lag way behind the curve on in general. And if you put a few markers in that constellation of issues, I would say that environmentalism, I would think that medical ethics, I think that compassion, just generally compassion. I'm surprised. I was telling David and Hannah, my son-in-law, and my daughter, were over tonight for supper. It's David's birthday. Happy birthday, David.
Oh, wow.
We were talking about this very issue, and I said, it always kind of surprises me when I read Paul saying, "Weep with those that weep and rejoice with those that rejoice," because I'm always like, come on, really? Do we have to tell each other that? Like, is that a command that has to be laid out there? And then I go out and live in the church, and I'm like, oh no, I really wish you would have been more explicit. Like, a few more sprinklings of that statement could have helped. But I think this whole like coronavirus and the response that I'm seeing among people about it is just missing compassion. It's missing that same thing that's missing in our equation about environmentalism. It's missing in about like poverty relief, health concerns generally, like the whole panoply of issues. So that might be a big place to start where we can touch on maybe a lot of this stuff in concept before we get to the specifics. So why is that?
I think that, and I'd love to hear Titus's theory because I kind of have one too. There's a, if you go back to the roots of modern conservatism, it has its roots in the fundamentalism of the late 1800s, early 1900s. And one of the big tenets of that fundamentalism was anti-intellectualism, opposition to the experts. You think of the Scopes monkey trial being an example of the, you had the Bible believers on one side and the worldly experts on the other. And that tends to be a pretty common theme with a lot of this stuff. So we have experts telling us environmental stuff. We have experts telling us medical stuff. So obviously those are godless people that we just need to not pay any attention to because they're here to take away our guns. And is kind of the narrative because all that's got tied together. So that's my theory for why the conservative faction has taken this is all getting blown out of proportion, is because it's experts telling us this stuff. Now, if it were some guy in his parents' basement that was telling us this stuff on a sketchy YouTube channel, well, then we would all be all over that. So anyway,
it's almost like the more expert you are, the less reliable you are.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's like we have a Christian version of the opposite of the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
And the modernist movement was tied to the social gospel also, which I think also is why fundamentalism and then evangelicalism, which is kind of the child of fundamentalism, is probably opposed to some of this compassion stuff too.
So yeah, I don't know how to untangle all of the things that are connected here, because I mean, I feel like it's really dangerous to just, when people develop this mindset of just rejecting expert opinions literally because they come from experts. But I also think there's reason to be charitable to how a large percentage of the population gets to that point. In the United States, in the Western world in general, we're in a late stage of, kind of a social cycle that happens in cultures in which, and one of the things that happens in that cycle is that elites, subject matter experts, specialists who know, who understand realms of knowledge that the common people don't understand, begin to realize that they can use that. They begin to kind of gang up to use that knowledge against regular rank and file people. And they develop an elitist, like a superior attitude as well, usually along with that. And people get so used to being lied to by experts and finding out that experts were lying to you later after the fact, and realizing that experts genuinely do use their knowledge against the rest of us on so many occasions, that the natural tribalism of people takes over and says, well, those people are the enemy. If they're telling me something, it must be bad for me. And that's especially the way that an underdog population tends to view the experts in a society, when those experts represent a different demographic than them. And that's kind of where a lot of conservatives in the US feel like they are now. I mean, to a lot of us, it feels like it's still a strong movement, but the fundamentalist movement in the United States is arguably fading away.
Yeah.
And so there's this sense of being besieged, and you have all of these intelligentsia who have contributed to the demise of people like me, and it makes sense that I don't want to listen to them. But we take these intellectual shortcuts, which then is, to make it easier to work through a complex world, we just decide experts are bad. regular guys on YouTube are good or more reliable, and then we start rejecting information that we don't actually have any other source to get good information about a situation.
What's strange to me, though, is that when someone breaks an arm, they're not going to go on YouTube and figure out how to,
Well, you'd be surprised. I know some people that do.
Yeah, but I mean, there seems to be a little inconsistency with the rejection of experts' opinions on certain matters, but when it really counts for your personal life, often you will.
Well, and
punt to
nobody's
their
writing their own softwares or not checking on Google or anything else. There's a lot of places where trust experts. I think what Anthony's saying that I can sympathize with, and I can see it in my own life in a few respects. Like I've chosen not to vaccinate my children, and I'm very seriously reconsidering at the moment for a few different reasons, but the reason that I chose to defy the experts is because I had a personal experience that contravened. So my first child in her normal, I didn't know to think, and we had a reaction with one of my children, and then all the experts told me that I was wrong or I was making it up or that what I was seeing I wasn't seeing, and I said, okay, I don't trust you. So there was a loss of trust there. But then I think more generally, the place where our people are setting themselves at distance from expert opinion is that the presumption that if your science, if your medicine, whatever begins, if its starting point is that my God doesn't exist and evolution or whatever else the case may be, if your initial premise is that my faith system and worldview is automatically wrong or isn't able to assimilate into that framework, then I'm not going to listen to what's coming from what you're producing out of that system. And I think that's at the highest level, that's probably where the conservative Christian people are bailing out on established facts, which could lead us to a whole nother discussion of that particular issue. And we may do that someday, but I don't want to get bogged down that rabbit trail.
I just thought of a rabbit trail that we could get bogged down in, which is you being an anti-vaxxer.
Well, like I said, I'm considering becoming a reformed anti-vaxxer. But yeah, we should talk about that. I actually have one of our tech podcasts is specifically on vaccines.
Yeah. I that's one of the ones I actually haven't watched yet, but yeah, I'll have to go check that out.
Yeah, if you're curious about that, as it pertains to me, anyhow, you can check it out there.
Sure thing.
But
Go ahead,
Dave.
I do think that with what I said as far as experts and stuff, I agree with Anthony that experts are, at least to some degree, to blame because of what you just said in your story. If you want to be trusted, you got to stop lying to people.
Right.
You got to stop pretending that stuff isn't the way that stuff is. That is, well, it turns people off. And there's too many stories that people have said about vaccines, and vaccines may be 98% safe or 99% safe, but there are people, I've talked to people, that have had those experiences, and the doctor, oh, definitely not. This is absolutely not anything. It's just,
yeah,
I think it is. Well, this is what makes people not believe what you're saying.
Well, and the other issue may be that the experts are too expert. In that we have such a hyper specialized world that people may be very expert in the small, like I've seen some world leading specialists in very, very, very niche medicine for Cephas. He has a genetic disease that we only know 50, maybe 100 people in the world have. And like, that's a really thin slice that you're talking about right then. And we've seen people who are at the top of the field. Well, if I ask them about breastfeeding or about anything else, like, forget about it. They're going to tell me something, but it may have nothing to do with what the facts are because they're so specialized in what they actually know.
So you said you diverge from the experts when you have a personal experience, but anecdotal evidence can be faulty. I mean, you could be in the minority of that statistic. Where I generally make the distinction is if it's a field or a topic that I've invested a lot of time studying. And this is what I usually tell people. When my position on Christian nonviolence is a minority position within, theological studies. However, I feel confident that I'm correct because it's something that I've studied, I've thought about, and I feel confident debating, the best theologians in the other camp. But that's something that I've invested energy in. If it's something like science or medicine where I haven't had the time and energy to put, a lot into it, I'm generally going to go with the majority viewpoint, which isn't always correct, but is probably the safest thing to do, because we can't study every field. I mean,
Right.
the world is so complex, that's just not possible.
There's a fantastic, I cite this reference a lot. Rebel Media, a YouTube channel called Rebel Media, has a video on sense making. Daniel Schmacher, I think is his name, and it's really brilliantly done. The guy's really prescient in his explanation of how we make sense of the world. And the fact of the matter is, none of us know what we're talking about. I mean, if you talk about climate change or vaccines or any complex issue, or economics or political issues and legislation, there's a very tiny number of people who are actually qualified to have an opinion on those subjects. And if you talk to them, they'll usually tell you it's much more complex than I could explain to you, and I'm not sure I understand it well. And because that's what expertise does, it makes you realize how much is unknown. Like, talk to an expert neurologist in the top of his field, and he'll tell you all the things he doesn't know. Like, that's a consequence. Dunning-Kruger shows that's a consequence of expertise. And so what the rest of us are doing who are not experts is picking our pony. Like, there's competing agendas around a whole host of different issues on all those different facets. And we just go with the narrative that fits our worldview much more often than we're actually assessing the facts of the case. Because we're not qualified in most cases, and nobody is. We don't have to feel bad about that. Nobody's invested in these things unless it's your business, unless it's your profession, to really know. So, like, okay, so for instance, to get back on topic, like, if you talk about climate change or environmentalism or coronavirus, world pandemics, like something that nobody knows anything about. Who knows epidemiology? Who knows statistical analysis of exponential growth curves? Who knows the things that are most prescient for this particular case that's affecting all of us? Nobody's going to go do a degree in epidemiology to figure out what their opinion should be on this matter. You already have a worldview in place and an authority structure in place that is going to inform how you're going to respond to coronavirus. And if you're disposed to listening to the scientists and to watching carefully and vetting information, then you come away with certain conclusions. If you have a narrative around, conspiracies, or somebody's out to get me, or nobody's going to tell me the truth, or I'm all on my own and I have to figure it out for myself and fend for myself, all those things contribute to how people are going to respond to any new, especially threatening situation.
Maybe we could get into some of those conspiracy theories, because I think there's never a good time to believe any conspiracy theory, but the current ones are just so absurd. Like, the idea that the NBA is going to be willing to lose millions of dollars, for example, because of media hype, or
Right.
to get rid of Trump, is just completely irrational. Like,
Right.
think about all the different, I mean, in any conspiracy theory, there's so many different factors. There's so many people involved that would have to be in on it. There could be no leaks, and there has to be extreme collaboration for, like, 9/11 to be an inside job, for example. But on the level of the coronavirus, it's even more extreme. Like, there's no way that something like this could be that.
Well, 135 countries now. Like,
Yeah.
I think I had a Mennonite bishop reach out to me just today, a friend of mine, and ask me if I thought that the Chinese had manufactured coronavirus to destroy the West. And I don't hardly know what to say. I typed back 4 letters. Nope. Like I didn't even want to go into it, and I don't know if that's a hell. I did end up going into it because I can't control myself. But the thing is, like, I don't know where to go with that, because I don't know what the hit to the Chinese economy was, $1 trillion, whatever. They locked down a city of 11 million people to begin with, and then other cities after that. There's still people in lockdowns, and then their people died and all this stuff, and now it's 135 countries and all. Like, what I ended up telling them, and I don't know, maybe you guys have some good tools for deconstructing conspiracies, is that we can look at cause and effect scenarios. Like, okay, put China aside. South Korea acts the opposite of America. They test everyone as fast as they can. They do all their contact tracing. Culturally, they're much quicker to do social distancing and to value the whole over the individual's liberty. And so they have this huge caseload with an incredibly small number of deaths. And or Germany, for instance, Germany has like twice as many cases as America and half as many deaths already. And I don't think we even know the tip of the iceberg in America. And so there's these cause and effect scenarios that you can play out that hopefully help people deconstruct some of those ideas. But where they come from is probably, like, I think the most dangerous thing about conspiracies is that facts don't usually fix them.
Because they can always be part of the conspiracy.
Right.
Once you believe that anything you disagree with is fake news, well, you're insulated against any kind of argument to the contrary, because any fact that I bring is fake news. I could bring somebody into the room who was there and talked about it. Well, that's just a crisis actor. I can show you videos or sound bites. Well, that's just a deep fake. At this point, you can write your own reality in your own mind, and we got confirmation bias as part of that. And yeah, we have a couple comments. I don't know if you want to address any of this. One is, please discuss history and origin of CDC and World Health Organization. I don't know anything about the history.
No, I don't either.
So that's one. Just a couple comments. Shouldn't Christian stewardship lead to good environmentalism? I personally think so.
Yeah, I do too.
I mean, he left us to take care of the place, so it seems like we probably ought not trash it while he's gone. Somebody says the government has been,
but it's all gonna burn. It's all gonna burn.
I think
Davey.
that's the problem. Yeah, it's dispensational premillennialism that has killed the idea of Christian environmentalism. Like, when God's going to destroy the earth, why should I take care of it?
Yeah, if he's going to trash it anyway.
Right.
Let's get it done beforehand.
Somebody says the government has been inaccurately painting vaping as lung killers, so they lose credibility when it counts with coronavirus. I don't know anything about that issue, so
I
might
think
be a
trolled. Is that Curtis?
That was not Curtis.
It's not
I don't
Curtis.
think it was a troll. I think this person was serious, so maybe we shouldn't laugh. But
sorry for laughing. I assumed that was Curtis.
No, not this
Vaping is bad for you. Don't do it.
All right, next.
I don't think Curtis is here yet. It'll get more interesting when he arrives.
Maybe we should tag him in the comments.
And then this is a question. Is God not fully qualified, or is the real spiritual man then not at the best place? Do we really think we are on our own to just reason it out? Does prayer not mean God speaks back? Can God not lead us to make the right choices, or is faith out of its league?
Well, that's an interesting question for two reasons. One, I think that, I think the ethos of the question, and I hope I'm not misreading it, but what it makes me think of is, I see this, Jesus is bigger than coronavirus. Let's have faith. He's the great physician. Don't be afraid. That kind of stuff that I see a lot from our kind of people about the particular crisis. And I think so so that's one whole kind of issue around this. And then the other thing is like, how do we decide? And I think if we go back to that narrative of who do I trust when I come into this, when I come into a threatening situation, especially, or some kind of major conflict or major decision, like, am I going to listen to the government about how to deal with Corona, or am I going to go my own path? Like, I think that there's this concept that I think is really amazing. I first heard it from John D. Martin, and he said that he defined the abundant life as, if you knew everything that God knew, you wouldn't make any different decision. That's an abundant life. And that's a beautiful description, because what it means is that I can live like I have omniscience when I don't. Because if I'm informed by the principles that Christ is teaching me, then I don't have to know everything. The principles will guide me what to do when I don't know what to do. And so, like, for instance, in this case, if I know that if I want to love my neighbors and my community well, there's an elderly lady that lives on the corner of my, like, just a few houses from me. I want to think about her. Like, if she's the one that's at risk now and my young family is at very low risk, I want my choices to be informed about what's best for the people around me, not just self-motive. And what happens then is, if we learn to put enough of those, like, principled virtues in our process for making decisions, that then it works out, it resolves the problem of me not knowing how to work out which experts to listen to and who to follow and whose advice to keep and whose not to. I just follow the principles of loving my neighbor. And in this case, that's a fairly easy one to work out. It's really, really dangerous for old people. The death rate's 15% if you're over 80 years old. So that is an easy thing to do. I'm around old people from time to time. I don't want them to be sick. So how can I amend my life and take on whatever inconvenience is necessary to care for those people around me? That's how you work through the dilemma. Now, on the other end, like the whole Jesus is bigger than Corona thing, like, well, that's not really the question we're asking, is it? Of course, Jesus is bigger than Corona, but he was also bigger than the Second World War, or bigger than the bus that ran over little Jimmy, or bigger than the war that killed millions of people. Jesus is bigger than everything. That's not really
Bigger
the
than
question.
King Herod. Bigger than
Right.
King Herod when he killed the
Right.
babies in Bethlehem.
Exactly. So that's not really helpful in the scenario to say Jesus is bigger or just have faith. I think what happens is that people get into some kind of cognitive dissonance or a panic phase or not knowing what to do, and then they just, like, Jesus all over it. Like, I'm just gonna Jesus it, and that doesn't mean anything except for I'm salving myself from having to make a decision by just saying Jesus.
Well, what I would say that the word for that is superstition. That's
right.
You can throw, nature, or
Right.
The flying spaghetti monster, just invoke something that
Right.
makes you feel good over a crisis, and that's not really the way God works in the world,
right.
typically. And so, and that's mere superstition. It's a way of dealing cognitively with the complexity and the scariness of a situation, but it doesn't help us actually be useful in the world. But I'm thinking, like, this is really good. I mean, sound principles that probably almost anyone would agree with, that we should pay attention to compassion. You think of someone you love who's vulnerable to this. If you knew that your actions were putting them at risk, almost anybody would want to stop. But I think we have to put it in a reverse a little bit. We kind of jumped over the question. I mean, you said, Matthew, that when we apply the principle of, say, the love for our neighbors, or compassion for the vulnerable, to a situation like this, then that means we don't have to sort through all of the, we don't have to sift through all the data in the same way, but we still have to have good enough data to conclude that my choice not to run off to a business conference right now is going to actually help somebody's grandma. And that seems to be something that is not at all clear to a lot of people at this point. How should people sift through the data, like why have some of us arrived at the conclusion that we should batten down the hatches and stay home as much as possible and not mingle, and other people are posting pictures on social media, like the governor of my state like 2 nights ago, going out to bars and telling everybody, hey, have fun, there's no problem. Like why, how, obviously I think in this conversation the 4 of us are agreed that compassion means social distancing at this point, which is what all the experts are saying. How does a person get from the skepticism that many plain people I'm encountering and many conservatives I think across the board are still carrying about this all being hype? Where should we direct people to find data that we could agree in common might be trustworthy?
I think the biggest objection is the flu kills more people or has killed more people. And also we could get into the topic of how social distancing actually does work. I think those are 2 routes we could go with that question.
Well, the question is how deeply ingrained is the conspiracy? I've talked with a few, sadly and unfortunately, I've talked with a few flat earthers at length. It's not something I recommend. There's a certain point to that particular genre of conspiracy that it just you have as much hope of convincing a wall. Like there's some people, and I think that's what you have to get to the motive for the conspiracy, not the motive of the conspiracy, the motive for the conspiracy. Like what are people getting out of it? And there's a few different things that people get. I mean, it is a preservation of some kind of tribalism. When we're a niche closed group, like we have to circle the wagons in a different way. Like social distancing from the plain community may be rejecting conventional wisdom that's happening in the world because we're a small subset of people and we do things our own way and we're not going to be beholden to conventional wisdom. But there's also, kind of like a Gnostic version of conspiracy theory, this ego about knowing what nobody else knows. Like I figured out what nobody else does, and that stuff is really, really pernicious. It's really, really subtle, and
very thrilling.
It makes you feel really, really important. Like all the dumb people, they just don't understand. But I've seen the light. It's an enlightenment. And that enlightenment, when it's based on darkness, is how great is that darkness? It's really, really bad. So there's a spectrum of belief in conspiracy that's really hard to crack through. I think in general, for people that just haven't done the legwork to figure it out, there's plenty of information out there, but like for instance, Titus, you mentioned the flu thing. The flu question. Well, it's at surface value, it's a sensible enough objection to have. The flu kills more people, but it's not hard to. What I found helpful was to explain the differences. When we talk about infectious disease, we're talking about some important factors. One of them is the R naught of how transmissible a given vector is, and that's expressed in a ratio for every person that gets that particular infectious disease. How many people will they infect? So an R naught of 1 means every person that gets it is going to infect 1 person on average. An R naught of 2 is every person that gets it's going to infect 2 people. Well, so you can look at what is that for the flu. It's about 1.6 to 1.8. And you can look at it for coronaviruses, it's hard to tell. This number is mutable because it depends on what you do to stop transmission. But in the natural, like when some of the early studies that came out of Wuhan, it was as high as 4.2 to 6.3, somewhere in that range, which is hugely transmissible. Another hugely transmissible disease would be like measles or pertussis. They're both they have like an R naught of like 15 or 16, hugely transmissible diseases. So these are things that are quantifiable. And then you also look at case fatality rate and how out of 100 people, how many people die when they get it. If you look at the flu, that's like 0.02. If you look at coronavirus, and it's wildly variable, again, depending on treatment and other things, but the average seems to be right around 2, which that's a factor bigger, 0.2 to 2 is a huge difference. So yes, many more people have had, one important thing too that I think helped our people. We had a meeting that had to decide if we were going to quit having meetings or not, and we did that, I think, last Wednesday. And the church, my congregation meets in my home, and so we've been dealing with health and hygiene for a long time because my family's had a lot of sickness over the last year, and so it's been an issue that's come up time and again. And when we just had a conversation as a brotherhood to decide whether or not to suspend our Sunday meeting, and we decided to, one of the things that we talked about was that I sat in a room with my brothers and I said, okay, look, well, here's the thing. When we meet together, it's not just us meeting together. It's everyone that's our sphere of contact meeting together in this place. So there's a brother that has his children in school. That school is coming into this room. There's my clients that I work with, they're coming into this room. We have a brother who's a doctor. The patients he comes into contact with are coming into this room. All of our spheres of contact are meeting at this rally point. And if I was to communicate this particular virus to one of them, it goes into their whole contact sphere. And that's why social distancing works. And I think maybe people don't understand that. It's another big variable with this and the flu is that, if you think of the flu, there are natural immunities. People develop natural immunities to every flu strain. And so you think of these networks of growth for a viral trend. And as this network, it's an exponential network, a potentially exponential network of transmission. Well, as soon as you follow one of those lines, a virus follows one of that lines and it affects me, and then I come into this meeting and it infects all of you, and then you go out. Well, as soon as it hits someone who has natural immunity to that influenza virus, that whole chain stops, and the potential magnitude of that infection stops. It's like a fire break. It can't just. Well, now with Corona, it's novel, it's brand new, nobody's ever experienced it before, and so we're like human Tinder for a wildfire. Like there's no stop breaks, there's no fire breaks. It can just get into a group of people and spread like wildfire because there's nothing that's going to stop it. So those are things that those are things I think people don't understand about those differences, and I can understand why they don't, but it's important enough that people have to understand.
Yeah, one example of social distancing actually working that I was reading about today is in 1918 with the Spanish flu.
Yes.
Apparently in Philadelphia, they had this like massive parade and we're just ignoring the warnings. And within a few days, thousands of people were dying. Overall, 16,000 people just in that city died in 6 months. And then you have the other case of St. Louis, which, practiced social distancing. They saw 1/8 of the casualties of Philadelphia, only 2,000 deaths. So it has been proven to work. And if you think about it this way, like me not going to a large gathering is literally saving lives. That's where the whole pro-life dimension of this comes in. Like we can't just be pro-life in the case of an unborn baby in the child's womb. Like one thing that I've said, and this might sound a little cynical, but if this was affecting unborn babies, then maybe people would start actually caring. Like, and that's where the whole pro-life ethic from womb to tomb comes in. Like we've got to care about people's lives, whether they're born or not born. And we literally are saving lives by doing this. And that's where, loving your neighbor comes in.
Yeah. Well, we're almost at the hour mark. Do we want to switch gears here?
There's somebody had asked about churches. So what churches are doing. Did you say, Matthew, that your church is not meeting?
Yeah, that's correct. We are not. We decided for 2 weeks so our first decision was for those who don't know, here in Boston, we have 5 congregations that meet in separate locations. And from time to time, we have what we call citywide meetings where all the congregations come together in one place. And last Thursday, we were supposed to have a citywide meeting. And on, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday, we decided to suspend that for the next 2 weeks. We had 2 booked in a row. And so getting all the churches together was something we decided to put off because that's quite a large meeting. And then we left it to each congregation to work out if they wanted to suspend their meetings or not at a local level. I think that all of them decided to. Yeah. So then what does that mean? I think that's actually a really great question. I'm glad that you brought that up, Dave, or whoever commented it, because I think what it exposes is what we have invested in our meetings as opposed to our communities. Like, if what it means to be Christian is bound up in meeting in a building at a certain time and place, then the idea of foregoing a meeting of the church feels like the devil winning. Like we've lost somehow ground to the enemy because the church didn't meet. And I think that's I don't want to be offensive, but I think that's a really shallow view of what the church actually is. The church is so much more. It's a community and a network of people living the gospel of Christ in the world around them. And that doesn't stop if we don't have meetings. In fact, it can be quite expanded. In this case, we've been looking for people who are vulnerable that we can try to do medical pickups and groceries for. And if I could get our churches not to meet and our young men to go out and gather household materials and medicines for elderly people, that is most definitely the church being Christ's people, even if they're not meeting. I know that's not an either or construct, but I'm just making the point that just because we didn't meet on Sunday doesn't mean we've lost ground to the devil somehow.
Yeah.
Right. That's a really good point.
Someone today was PMing me and talking about how people have always been risking their lives to meet as the church, and why, we would stop meeting in this case. I'd be interested in hearing you guys' thoughts about that. But I mean, for one, stopping the meetings for a month or so is completely different than, just stopping meeting, period, and never starting back up again. But also, this is more about risking other people's lives than our own lives. So
Right.
if it was just the fear that we would be persecuted, then I think, yes, that's not a good reason to stop meeting, although maybe you should start meeting in secret. But there's, obviously meeting in secret isn't going to help this. So, I don't know, what are those are just some thoughts some responses off the top of my head, but what do you guys think about that? Because I think that's one thing that people are bringing up a lot too.
If it was just your life you were putting at risk by meeting, that would be a different story, but it's not.
Yeah.
That would be my first response is, you're the whole thing of spreading the disease and all that kind of thing, like what Matthew was saying, everybody that you meet with, everybody that you have contact with, you're meeting with, by extension.
It's another thing that's important to distinguish between like that scenario of a persecuted church or a pandemic is that the situation we're talking about here is a short-term threat that if you do the right thing now, either way, it's going to blow over. But
right.
You're talking, it's kind of like if you know that a tornado is coming through your town, are you going to say, oh, none of us are going to our storm cellars because it's 5 minutes till church?
Jesus is bigger than a tornado.
Yes, exactly. Like that is nobody would think that was sound thinking. I think almost anybody would cancel a meeting over that. But then a pandemic feels like something like big and out of control and like a force of nature that's never going away. But the reality with this is that there's a specific cycle this is going through. And there are specific actions that if we take them during this specific time window, the next few weeks, they will put thousands of lives at risk. They will cost thousands of lives that otherwise people that would not have to die, people that are important in the lives of their loved ones. And so it's a postponement for a short-term threat that's a matter of charity. And we can see that in more acute and immediately visible threats. But I would argue that COVID-19 is more like a storm bearing down on your town than it is like a government that persecutes you. They're going to be persecuting you next year, in 10 years maybe. But if I knew, to even use the persecution example, if I knew that tonight there was, we had a church meeting scheduled for tonight, and there was a marauding band of raiders coming through here that hated Christians, and they were looking for meetings to break up, and they were on a route from Pennsylvania to Texas, and this was the night they were coming through. Would I gather the meeting on this night because God is stronger than the raiders are? Not unless I had some specific expectation that we were called to be a witness to those people and make some kind of difference for good by meeting them. We wouldn't just ignore the fact that there was a short-term threat bearing down on us. We would postpone what we were doing. We would adjust ourselves to be smart. And that isn't letting God down. That's simply being intelligent stewards of the life that he's given us. We're not harming anyone by doing that. We're saving innocent lives by doing that. And it's very different than the argument for we do violence to save lives. To stay home during a virus outbreak harms no one, and it saves potentially many. There's no downside to it.
Yeah. I think there's another, when I look at when I analyze the situation from here in Boston, demographically, we're a very young church. We have a large number of our people are students, and even those that aren't are still quite young. I'm sadly I'm in the top 5% of older men in my congregation, and so we would fare quite well when you look at the demographic breakdown of serious complications from COVID-19. And I think that's what's important to me, and why we decided to not have our meetings is not because we were afraid of ourselves.
Right.
And not that that's wrong. I mean, I don't. That would be a perfectly reasonable thing to do. I'm not against choosing to suspend a meeting because everybody would get ourselves sick and we would die or have serious problems. But that's not really what's driving our decision. What's driving our decision is that we're concerned for our broader community. And I think that's where I'm concerned about the Christian church writ large in the whole country, because it doesn't seem like that's how a lot of people are talking about these decisions.
Right.
Like as a piece in a, now I'm as Christo-anarchist as a lot of people, and I'm as separate and aloof from the structures of America as I know how to be, but I very much consider myself and my people part of the communities in which we live. And I know that we have an impact on the people that live around us and that we work with and that we come into day-to-day contact with. And it's for that sake that all the more reason it's time to do what's wise for the community and not just ourselves.
Right.
The fact that it's so easy for us, with things like this, I can have all the meetings I need. I can have phone calls. We can have contact with each other. We can encourage each other. In fact, I have a meeting tomorrow night that we're going to have, which is our accountability meeting in my congregation, and we're going to do it on this so that we have our meeting.
Facebook Live.
Not on Facebook Live, but on Zoom.
Come on, you need to keep us from getting bored somehow.
That's real accountability.
It would be instructive. It would pass the time while we're all batting down. Yeah, that it's even less I would argue it's even less excusable. Yes. At this point, like this would have been a real hardship for people
Right.
in a lot of times and places.
Right.
But here we are, we can communicate, we can, it's such a small inconvenience to hang on for a few weeks
Right.
for the sake of other people.
Do you have more than 10 members in your family, Matthew?
I do.
That's going to be a problem.
Yeah. So
I have
going back,
11 children.
You might need to send some of them to the neighbors.
I think if you were already part of a pack of 11, your grandfathered in. The announcement was made when you were already together.
Did Trump mention that in his advisory?
No, but he would have if he had thought of it.
I want to impersonate him and say and make the exception, but that might feel like mocking our president, so I'll refrain.
Right, and it's probably a crime.
Jay Anthony told me in the chat not to make fun of Trump tonight, so.
Well, that's yeah. Yes, we did.
Oh,
it's a challenge. It's like a tick for Titus.
Yeah.
It's his blanket. It's his safety blanket.
Yeah. Going back to what you were saying, Matthew, that about as far as trusting God, and a couple of you talked about this. Where's trusting God come in? I think that's something that a lot of Christians have a really hard time distinguishing. I've watched it happen. I watched people to their detriment not be able to tell the difference between trusting God and tempting God. Mm-hmm. And that's something we've got to get straight. There are things that you do that you can do that are foolish, and you could say, well, I'm just trusting God. Some of you have heard the story about me being assaulted with somebody. A guy hit me on the head hit me on the head 2 times, and once on the elbow with a claw hammer. That's a kind of an interesting story. If you want to get the King James version, I wrote up a little King James version of it. Some of the people watching have read that. But anyway, below this man meaneth to kill me, and hath made a good start already, and he rose to flee from before his face. But anyway, I was in that situation as a result of trying to do God's work, witness to somebody and so forth. And I actually had a friend that told me it may be not such a great idea to just go to random people's houses like that you don't know that super well. And I was like, well, I'm doing God's work. God's going to protect me. And I looked back and I realized, I was actually tempting God. I thought I was trusting God, but I was putting myself at unnecessary risk. I mean, we take normal precautions all the time and don't say, you look both ways before you cross the street. You don't just trust that you're not going to get hit by a bus because God's bigger than the bus after all, right? Amen. Right. So, and it's not something where you can do a simple rule and say, well, this is tempting God, this is trusting God. And all of us may be at a different place, but I think that's where listening to God is important, to say, Lord, is this something you're calling me to? Like Anthony said, are you calling us to meet tonight, even though we know that's a risky thing? Or are you calling us to use common sense and say, let's just wait till the bandits are gone?
Well, I think it goes along with my view of grace as well, is that my expectation, the way I process the world and reality is that God expects me to do everything that I can do. He expects me to work and to think my way through what I have access to. And then he fills in the rest, like what's past my abilities and past my strength and past my resource. That's where grace fills in. But it doesn't start until I get to the place where I've done what I'm supposed to do. That's where God's grace kicks in. That's where provision is. That's where more than what I have to bear comes into play. Up until that point, God's like, wow, I don't think he's wasteful. I think he has a sense of economy. I think he has a sense of, like, I gave you a brain, I gave you a body. You're supposed to use those things. They're they're not there for show, put them to work. And then when you've limited that resource, then I'll be there for you. Then I'll fill in the rest of the stuff, the rest of the. So let me tell you a story about Corona. My daughter came home from Africa not too many days ago. And actually, she was the last. She came in 6 hours from Brussels. She came in 6 hours before European travel was stopped. So one of the last few flights from Europe into America. She had come from Entebbe to Brussels and then to Newark, and then was supposed to catch a flight from Newark to Boston. And I've been watching this for a long time. I've been watching it since early January and expecting something bad to happen in the US from it. And so I told her to make sure and wear a dust mask. She was the only person on the plane that did, but she was obedient to her papa, and she wore a dust mask the whole flight. And an actual, N95 respirator to keep her safe on the plane. And then so she gets the Entebbe flight, goes fine. She's from Brussels, lands in Newark, and on the tarmac, they make an announcement that says, we're going to be here for a while before we pull up to the gate. The CDC needs to do a health check on some of the passengers. Paramedics come in and pull 3 people out of the flight. Well, this is not a good thing. And so Chloe calls me when she gets out of the plane, and she tells me what happened and all this is going on. So now we know that airports are a hub of where all this is happening. And so I'm like, well, great. Now she's been on a plane. That's likely, at least the airline and thinks that these people had COVID or had symptoms of it. So now she's supposed to get on a flight from Newark up to Boston. And I know that Logan has had several cases connected to it. And so I said, no, stay there, find yourself a quiet spot. And I drove down to Newark to get her. So we're taking all these precautions. And then, in the last few days, as we've been talking about it, my daughter's been in Africa working with pregnant women for 4 months. And when she got here, she said, we were talking about all this response and what we were going to do. And now she's in quarantine. Now we have her quarantined at the house. And in talking about her return and her future, she said that what she really wants to do is go to Moria on Lesbos and work with the refugees there, who now Corona is sweeping through the refugee camps, and they won't send paramedics in. They won't send, there's no medical personnel, and those refugees are going to die in a really bad way from this. And they're looking for people. All the NGOs are pulling out because there's no medical care there. And so she was saying, so I'm watching my daughter take all these precautions at the same time saying, I would like to be exposed to Corona so that I can go and work with these people. So that to me is Christian compassion. Like, if you want to say Jesus is bigger, it better have some kind of punchline to that story. It better mean something to the gospel and to Christ, not just, and I think, Dave, that's what you're getting at, is that it has to be about something. It's not just for you. It's not so that you can satiate your fear and say, I don't have to be afraid, and here's what I'm like, superstition. It's not a token to put in place of my rationale and my rational fears, or irrational fears for that matter. If we're going to make claims about Jesus being bigger than Corona, then put that to work. Go volunteer at your local hospital and sit in a waiting room and hand out masks. Go do something. If that's where you're at, if that's what you want to do with it in response to this virus, then use it for the good of your community, not just as a way to forget all you people, I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because this is what often is the hidden subtext behind religious language like that, when it's used in a flippant and shallow way, is that what's really going on is that I don't want to be inconvenienced by this knowledge, and therefore I'm going to just say God is bigger than this problem, and it takes the responsibility off me to be responsible.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
Amen.
Yeah, I really like the example you gave there. I was actually going to say something similar in that when I took my newborn son to India, a lot of people thought we were stupid. Like, why are you risking his life, taking him to a
Mhm.
foreign country? And it's something I had to think through. Like when I went over there when I was single, I mean, I didn't care. Like, I mean, I would, say really crazy stuff like, I want to be martyred and all that, which my wife didn't really like when she was getting to know me. Um, but it was a different calculation. Like when I had a newborn baby, what should I do? But at the end of the day, like it's never going to become more safe to go to India. So that's, in that sense, it's different than this situation. But there's the gain. I think you have to look at what you're gaining also by taking the risk. So the gain for those who otherwise would not hear the gospel and those whose physical needs would not be met if I wouldn't go to India is something that could not be accomplished without me taking the risk. Now, the gain of being able to go watch a movie at a movie theater is just not worth the risk. So you have to
Mhm.
calculate like what are you actually gaining by risking your safety and the safety of those around you. And like the example of your daughter wanting to go over there. I mean, I think that's amazing, and that's exactly what Christians should be known for. They shouldn't be known for what Jerry Falwell Jr. is doing and not shutting down his university. Like, I
Right.
mean, and unfortunately, that's just the narrative that Christians are putting forward in this country. Like,
Right.
Mhm.
you can always trust Jerry Falwell Jr. to make the wrong decision in every situation, is what I've concluded by now.
Yeah, well, I have a short list of people that are like that. I think I mentioned it a while back. I can
please,
tell. I
please
can
don't
look.
list them here.
No, I'm not going to name names, but I can basically look and see who liked something. I don't even have to read the comment. I can just see who liked it. And that tells me everything I need to know. Or conversely, I can read a comment and see it has 3 likes and predict who liked it. So yeah, that's really unfortunate. One question I had for you, Matthew. You said your daughter's in quarantine in your house.
Mhm.
So how does that work? You feed her pizza and pancakes?
Yeah, pretty much.
Those are the only things you can slide under the door?
We moved her into my bedroom so that she had a private bathroom. We ran a experiment. My family was sick a couple weeks ago before Chloe got back, and it was I mean, I don't know, maybe it was corona for all I know, but the children had flu-like symptoms of fever and everything, and so we had been getting the house set up if something like this were to happen. So we tried to keep everybody, sick children in their bedrooms and isolated, and bring them food and take their dishes out and bleach them and take care of everything. We kind of looked at it as a dry run, and it went better than a sickness normally does in my house, but almost everybody still got it. But what we realized is that the bathroom was the weak link. Children coming out of their bedroom and going down the hall and into the bathroom and then back to their rooms was, I think, the weak link to that system. So when we brought Chloe in, we moved her into my room, Eric and I's room, so that she had her own attached bathroom. Nobody goes in there but her. And outside of that room, in the room where the church meets, we have like a 3rd floor open space. We visit with her in there, but everybody wears protective masks, and we do a lot of hand washing and sterilizing. So she has her own space. There's a middle space where we meet together, where we have masks and are careful with hand washing and sanitizing everything. And then she's not down the rest of the house. So that's how we're dealing with it. Now that's way more protocol than anybody in the medical community, or certainly in the government advice is recommending for her case in particular. But we want to be extra careful. And this is for a girl who wants to get corona so she can go work with the refugees. So we really do. We're not afraid of it. We're afraid for our community that people are going to get hurt if we're not careful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We
don't have your audio, Anthony.
He's
but
done
we're
talking.
We're at almost an hour and a half, 90 minutes. It's probably long enough to hear us ramble on. Do we want to wrap up? Have some wrap up thoughts?
Yeah, we could. One of my friends texted me and said, "What the heck is a Christo-anarchist?" So if we want to go down a rabbit trail,
Let's do that the next one. That'd be a fun episode to do.
for sure.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yep, there
Yeah.
you are, Anthony.
Okay. I just tried a different mic. Didn't work. All right. Yeah. Well, I would be probably, since we spent most of the time discussing coronavirus and the love of neighbors, we should probably, one of the things we should do as we wrap up is for people who just haven't been paying attention, which I think is too many of us, what specific actions should everybody be taking in light of these principles?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I hope that it's redundant, but the message is important. You know, the beautiful thing is that for people that want to make comparisons about the flu, it appears, I heard some early reports that Hong Kong has eradicated their flu season almost 2 months early by fighting corona, because the same stuff works for both viruses.
Right.
So they've shortened their flu season by 2 months, which is a huge blessing from their fight of this particular virus. And what those things are is that, so start with the basics. Wash your hands, and you have to wash them well, wash them often, and you need to wash them for about 20 seconds. It just so happens that the Lord's Prayer, if you say it not like a Catholic doing penance, but like someone who's actually quoting the Lord's Prayer, is about 20 seconds. So that's a good opportunity to use the Lord's Prayer. I've been teaching my children to do that. We did something with the children. Erica had them for a homeschool lesson. They put lotion all over their hands, and then they sprinkled glitter. Each of them had a different color glitter. And then they all shook hands with each other. And by the time they all shook hands with each other, you had every color of glitter on your hands. And then they went and washed their hands. And after about 20 seconds is when all the glitter comes off. It was a very good object lesson for the homeschool children about how virus and germs work. So that's one important thing. Sterilize surfaces, get some Lysol or some bleach or some wipes. Surfaces that are touched regularly, wipe down once a day. Door handles, handrails, tables and countertops. And then coughing, you know, either into a tissue and into the wastebasket or into your elbow, so that it's not out into the air. And then now what they're advocating is what they're calling social distancing. People are starting to complain about the idea of social distancing because we don't want it to come across as antisocial, but physical distance. So, you know, the greeting of shaking hands and standing close to people for this time should be suspended. Wave hello to people. Don't come up close and talk close. Stand at a distance from each other. And when you're out in public, stay 6 feet from people, so that virus is much more difficult to transmit from one person to another. So those are the steps that we can all take. Not being in big crowds. Those are the steps that we can all take to stop the transmission of coronavirus.
Right on. All
Looks
right.
like we lost Anthony.
Not surprised. He went
I'm
to
here.
wash his hands.
I'm here.
Oh, we just lost your video. Oh, there you are.
I just had to get my my bling ready over here.
Oh, your Purell. That stuff's like gold right now.
Oh yeah. So
one thing I'm refusing to do is to buy any toilet paper or wet wipes from any of the whatever you fill in the blank, the name you want to call them, the people who bought them all up and are selling them at
the price gougers.
Yes, I don't care if I have to use wet washcloths and wash them. I don't care what I have to do. I will not give those guys 1 cent to my money.
Do you have a lawn, Titus?
I kind of have a lawn.
Just a random unrelated question.
Okay, yes, I do. It's mostly weeds, but are you saying that grass works? Have you been using that already?
Just wondered.
Has it been successful for you? I mean, we could all do what Asians do. I mean, they gross out when I tell them that I use toilet paper. Like, I mean, this is going downhill fast, but if you got a little bit of feces on your arm, you wouldn't go get a piece of toilet paper and wipe it off. You probably go wash it. So we could all start using water.
Mm-hmm. Yes. This conversation has probably gone far enough in this direction. There's so much I can say.
Let's wrap it up. Unless someone else has something to say, I'll probably, I haven't actually posted that other video yet. I've just been procrastinating, but I'll probably post this video on my YouTube channel, which is just my name on YouTube, and also on That Jesus Podcast if people want to share it in a form that they don't need to log into Facebook for.
Right.
Sure.
And check out Matthew's podcast, Talking in the Chasm, as well.
We're going to do a socially distant podcast this week.
Nice. On social distancing?
I think we may talk about some of this. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, nice. And check out Blanky Dave's Facebook live streams.
Yeah, I do them as like Wait But Why says, I do them every sometimes.
Yeah.
Try to do them daily, but it hasn't been happening lately. I've been trying to get back on the wagon.
And find Anthony in any comment section on Facebook.
Any is a strong word, Titus.
Quite a few. How about we just say that? Cool.
All right, well, thanks.
This has been
Wherever
a lot,
fine
guys.
conversations are had.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
We'll do it again soon.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thanks
right.
for watching.
Yep. See you guys.
And good night.
Good night.
Night.